going to go ahead and get started. I know we'll have some latecomers come in, but I do want to formally welcome everybody to the Big Texas Read. Thank you for being here on a Wednesday in May. We're so happy to see your faces, even though they're in Zoom tiles. But ever since David Samuel Levinson had this idea about a little over 2 years ago, we've met at least once a month for over 2 years, bringing readers and writers together for what amounts to a really brilliant and fun discussion each month. So thank you all for being here. My name is Blake Kimsey. I'm the Executive Director of Writing Workshops Dallas. And we're just a writing center here in town. And whenever David came up with this idea, he said, hey, why don't I introduce you to Alexandra Vandekamp down at Gemini Inc. And the three of us, let's try and run a reading series. And so then we were kind of off to the races. And ever since then, we've been very thankful to our bookstores, the Twig Bookshop down in San Antonio, who's been really good about helping us spread the word. Same thing with Interrobang Books up here in Dallas. They've been a great sponsor and supporter of this event, as has Humanities Texas, who gave us a grant to run this series. There you go, Humanities Texas in the house, and which is really fantastic. And also the University of Texas San Antonio library system has always been great about getting out the word. And also Lone Star Literary. They are so great and active on social media. I mean, they really want to connect readers with writers, and we're just happy to be kind of in their orbit, to have them mention the Big Texas Read and our two featured guests tonight. I'm going to hand it over to Florinda, who is representing Gemini Inc. tonight. She'll tell you a little bit about Gemini Inc. She'll introduce our featured guests, and then we will be off to the races. So during the Big Texas Read tonight, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat. I'll monitor them, and then at the end, maybe we can prompt you and we can have a conversation before we wrap it up at 8 o'clock. But thank you for being here tonight, and Florinda, I'll throw it over to you.
Thanks so much, Blake. And thank you all for joining us tonight. As he said, my name is Florinda Flores Brown, and I am the Director of Programs at Gemini Inc. And at Gemini Inc., we are San Antonio's Writing Arts Center, and our mission is to teach the craft of writing to people of all skill levels so they can bring their stories to life. And one of our core values is connection and dialogue, which is exactly why we are partnering with Dallas to bring this event to you tonight. And our moderator for this evening is Marjorie Herrera Lewis, and she is an author, journalist, and professor. She is the author of When the Men Were Gone, Fall 2018, a novel based on the true story of a woman who coached football in Brownwood, Texas during World War II. She is also co-editor of the Sports Day Bound, a collection of sports stories published by the Dallas Morning News. And our featured author for tonight is Johnnie Bernhard, and I know we will be talking about the book Sisters of the Undertow. A little bit about Johnnie. Johnnie Bernhard's debut novel, A Good Girl, was a finalist in Literary Fiction, Kindle Book Awards. Her second novel, How We Came to Be, received the Summerlee Book Prize. Her third novel, Sisters of the Undertow, was selected for discussion at the AWP conference, the Pat Conroe Literary Center, and the Southern Book Festival, Humanities, Tennessee. Named Best of the University Presses 100 Books by the Association of University Presses. It also received first place in the Press Women of Texas Communications Contest. All her novels are in the permanent collection of the Texas Center for the Book. And Johnnie is a 2020 TEDx speaker for Fearless Women series, and her latest novel, Hannah and Ariella, will be available August 2022. Without further ado, here is Johnnie and here is Marjorie. Thank you so much.
Hi, well, thank you. Yes, it's so great to be here, and I am so honored to sort of moderate this discussion with Johnnie, a dear friend of mine and a wonderful, wonderful author. I think what I'd like to do, well, first of all, I want to mention my computer went down, so I'm on my phone, and at some point my battery might get low because I'm in emergency mode here. If I have to get up and go plug it in, excuse me for that in advance. But what I'd like to do is maybe break this up into two parts here. I'd like to begin with having Johnnie do a little reading from her novel, Sisters of the Undertow, and then we'll spend a little time talking about the book itself. And then after that, we'll move on to talking a little bit about deeper messages and meanings and some of the things that Johnnie is trying to convey in her work. So I think that'll lead us into any questions we might have from those of you who are in attendance. So Johnnie, if you could take it away, let's get started. I'd love to hear the selection that you've chosen for tonight.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. And I thank Gemini Inc. and Dallas Writing Workshop for making this available to Texas authors and poets, and especially to David Levison, who was the creator of all of this. And Marjorie, thanks so much. And thank you, viewers. I'm going to begin with chapter 1 of Sisters of the Undertow in a reading. This book was launched a week before the world shut down for COVID in 2020. It came out the last week of March or the last week of February, and we all learned that the world would change in early March 2020. So I'm grateful to be able to continue to share this book with readers. She was different. I knew this when I was a kid, not in the sense I know now, but rather as an uneasy feeling in my stomach, an anxiety I wasn't old enough to recognize. I was fair. She was a brunette. I was lucky Kimberly Ann, the pretty and smart sister whose name was always called for the correct answer. She was unlucky Kathy Renee, the plain and troubled sister whose name was never called at all. We were sisters. I loved and hated her. We shared a double bed during our childhood. The only thing changing during those years was the bedspread. Sometimes it was purple and nubby, scratching our tender skin when we pulled it up to our chins. Sometimes it was a simple quilt, sewn together without a clever stitch. For the longest, our bed was covered in a white bedspread with fringe trailing on the hardwood floor. It changed with time, but my sister, the little girl I slept with every night, remained the same. Why I played the clarinet in the junior high band and won ribbons in track and field, she remained the same, a little girl with brown eyes, neither stunning nor intense. I think she always knew what people thought of her. She wanted to say something in return, and for many years I waited for her to say it, but I learned she was incapable of cruelty. We were born 16 months apart, of the same mother and father, yet our lives would become as different as two planets orbiting around the sun, never to fully understand each other, despite our years of circling. But in those early years, before the doctors and the education specialists, we were happiness in our ignorance of each other and the world. She didn't know I was smarter and healthier, and I didn't know she couldn't do story problems or read beyond the 4th grade level. Before, I knew she would always be different. We were perfect little girls in a happy world. Our bedtime ritual was one of friendship and camaraderie, except for the nights I would inflict my privilege as the older sister. Stay on your side of the bed. Here's the border. Don't cross it, I'd say to her, drawing an imaginary line in the center of the bed with my index finger. She met my challenge with confusion. Thinking it was a game, she tossed her right foot over the imaginary border. This was returned with the elbow to her side. She then rolled to the far side of the bed, as far away from me as she could go without falling off. All I could see was the wild mass of black hair, neither curly nor straight, just thick and coarse upon a pink and white pajama top, as her chest rose and fell in anguished sobs. Unlike her, I was capable of cruelty. But on those perfect nights of my childhood, we would jump into bed at the same time. No one wanted to be first. We only thought of the immediate. There were no regrets from yesterday or anxiety for tomorrow, All we knew was to jump on the bed, up and down, laughing and holding hands. It ended when my father knocked on our bedroom door. "Quit the monkey shines, girls." Those days were sealed tightly from the outside world. I didn't know what was fair and what was unfair. I didn't know about luck, that random toss of the dice, determining who you will be for the rest of your life. I didn't know that my sister had an IQ of 85. My dad didn't know it either, but I think my mom knew all along and hid it from us. The one certainty I knew in my childhood was every day would end the same, my sister lying next to me in our double bed. Light out, sissy. Night, night, cat, cat.
Wow, wow, that's just such beautiful writing, Johnnie. And I couldn't help but hear so many of these effective devices that we use, where we tell the reader something good and then we hit them with something that brings them back. You know, like you're telling this beautiful story and then all of a sudden, but unlike my sister, I'm capable of cruelty. You know, it's just these moments. So I'd like to know a little bit about what prompted you to write a story like this. So many of us have siblings, and we understand that we could grow up to be different despite coming from the same household. But what was it that inspired you to write this particular story with these two characters?
Well, obviously, sibling rivalry. It's a huge theme. It's a universal theme. People can identify with it all over the world. And I think readers are interested in exploring sibling rivalry. There's something almost mystical about children of the same biological mother and father, but their personalities can be vastly different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think one of the first visual and audio inspirations for this book, and I'm that kind of reader or writer, I'm character driven, and I'm usually motivated by something I see or hear from an individual. I was watching the morning news, and a young woman was being interviewed. She was the wife of an NFL football player, and visually, she was beautiful. She was healthy. She is everything that our culture says is successful: money, a position in life, beauty, articulate. Yet this young woman was discussing something as a woman that made her feel unsuccessful, as a failure. And those are the words she used in the interview. She could not conceive a child. She would miscarry after miscarry after miscarry. And I began researching that. And I began talking to women who had miscarried and what that did to their psyche and what the cultural expectations are for a woman to produce the Olympian ideal of perfection and child, and what that does to women who are unable to conceive a child. So this young woman went on to begin an organization that reached out to women that suffered multiple miscarriages and could not carry a child to full term. I was very curious about that. So that helped me develop the mother in this story. So these two sisters, 16 months apart, same biological father and mother. Kim is born first after many miscarriages. And she's healthy. She's perfect in every way. 16 months later, her little sister is born premature.
And Johnnie, while you're going through that, I have to plug in. So I'm going to disappear for 2 seconds, but I've got my headset on. I can hear you.
Okay, great.
So if you could.
So I'll just carry on with that story. So the other sister is born 16 months later, and this is the 70s, where the medical profession cannot do as much for preemies as they can do today. Medicine changes by leaps and bounds every year. We know that from living through COVID and how there would be new news almost once a week. So this second child is born with defects to the heart, the eyesight. She's everything our culture would see as handicapped, disabled. So as a writer, and as a human being, I'm always very curious of juxtapositions, total opposites, because I think there's a bit of magic to those things when they happen. And so this helped me develop the two sisters with the mother, and perhaps the mother's growing anxiety, already the anxiety of all these miscarriages.
Right.
And the social expectations as a woman, and then to have a child with a learning disability and a physical disability, the anxiety that would create. So in going through that, I talked to a lot of women that were in families that perhaps there was a child that was critically ill with leukemia, or a child that was disabled that would take a lot of time and attention within the household. And I'm grateful to these women that were very honest with me. They said, it creates a lot of guilt because you're not able to give to the other children. The other children have to put on a brave face. I spoke to a woman in Florida that her brother was diagnosed with terminal leukemia at 16, and she was 14 at the time. And she said, my parents, I understand this now as an adult in my early 60s, but at the time I was entering adolescence and I had no guidance. So
Wow.
you could imagine all the different personalities within the family learning to cope with a sibling or a child that takes great care.
Well, you know, you what you've talked about learning, that leads me to my next question. As we know in the fictional narration, protagonists need to change. You know, they start one way, they finish another. By the end of the book, they learn something. I think it's interesting that you took Kim's point of view. Could you talk a little bit about why you wrote it from her point of view, and without really giving away the story? I'm trying to be very careful here. What was it that, would you say, without giving away the story, was her journey?
Well, Kim's journey is to discover what it means to be fully human, to not be trapped by her insecurities. So again, here's that juxtaposition. We have a sister that's the Olympian ideal, what our culture would call the Olympian ideal. The polar opposite in a sister of great need, physically and mentally. And Kim, during her childhood, is somewhat on her own because of the need of this other sibling. And she begins escaping through books. When she goes through adolescence, she escapes through books. She later becomes a librarian. It's her security place to hide. And as she goes through the education system, and we're in the 70s, and I grew up in the Houston area during the 70s. At that time, there was a social experiment with public school children about doing group teaching. And I remember it clearly, being in the 7th grade. I was in a large gym area for my reading class that had 4 different groups, and you were grouped according to ability. Now imagine being in that room, and you're the Bluebird group, the overachievers. It was like a micro sorority fraternity of the kids that were probably going to be successful based on their mental aptitude. But within that same classroom were the average or on level readings, along with the children that were reading below grade level, all clustered together. Imagine what that would do. So Kim, and why I let her tell the story, is Kim is in that group and she loves her sister dearly, but she's also, as an adolescent, feels responsible. And I really don't want to deal with her being in the same reading group as me and what my peers are saying about my sister, because this little sister, she's teachable and ends up having a great life. She's a free spirit, unlike her older sister. She's a free spirit in that she's unencumbered by social norms. I should only hang out with these people. This is the elitist group, the Bluebird reading group. She simply loves people and enjoys them. She has no racial issues. She just enjoys people. She's a freer spirit than the protagonist, Kim. So that's why I chose Kim to tell the story. Kim needs to change more than her sister.
Right.
And I'm taking you as the reader on that journey. So, you know, hence the title, Sisters of the Undertow. What's going on with the psyche of these sisters beneath the surface, not the surface in the classroom and appearing what other people expect us to be, but the psychological undertow of discovering oneself.
Well, I love the title of the book too. I just think, you know, did you come up with that, or did your publisher?
Yes, I did. I did.
Yeah.
I have a lot of allusions to water. Within the book, and you know, quite frankly, there's a piece within the book where the two sisters are at South Padre Island. Now, Texans, Richard, been to South Padre Island as a kid. And because the little sister doesn't know fear, because if she knew fear, she wouldn't love people. She is a free spirit.
Right.
She jumps into the water and swims out. And her father keeps shouting to her, watch for the undertows, where the protagonist, the oldest sister, is fearful. What are people's opinion of me? Who am I in this world?
Yeah. Well, that's great.
Knows what's underneath the water, knows the treachery of the undertow.
Yeah, the danger. So, so could you, because there's so much at play here, you know, there is so much in relationships and emotion and everything. Can you talk a little bit, again, without giving away too much, about a scene or two that was very difficult for you to write because of the emotional depth of that piece in the book?
Yes, there's two particular scenes. It is the mother having the repetitive miscarriages, and I don't write to shock the reader. I write for the psychological transition a character's going through. It really cripples her as a human being. I had great empathy for her insecurity, her pain. The other very emotional scene, and it's somewhat of a violent scene, not too graphic because I'm not that kind of writer. I leave it to the reader's imagination. But Kim has gone on to attend college at Texas Tech in Lubbock, and she begins dating, and like all young people do, particularly the first year in college, you're really not learning so much at the university as you are about learning who you are and what other people are about. And so Kim begins to learn about men, and her only model to base men on would be her father, who's a very loving and tender man, a very respectful man, very kind man. And Kim puts herself in a dangerous situation by trying to take something from a dangerous man. But she wants to rescue this animal, this dog, that this is living with this man and he's mistreating this animal. And it was a very, very hard scene to write because you begin caring about your characters and the transformation they're going through. And, you know, towards the end of the book, the ultimate way of speaking to Sisters of the Undertow and all the water illusions, the water themes, I write about Hurricane Harvey, and your readers, you probably remember that. It was a few years ago in Houston where Houston drowned. So I've lived on the Gulf Coast my entire life. I've been through many hurricanes. And so I was reliving that the water's rising. The water has risen to the kitchen table. I'm sitting on the cabinet and I live in a single story house. What do I do? Am I strong enough to open the window and swim out? So yes, those emotional scenes are very tough to write, but they're necessary because it's part of the character's transformation, particularly for Kim.
Oh yeah, I you know, every time I would read one, I would wonder only because I know you, and so I'm thinking, how did Johnnie do this? You know, these are some tough pieces to write, but that's the beauty of being an author. So there's a lot of reference. You mentioned her mother and father, their mother and father. So let's take these four characters, the sisters and the parents, and you talk a lot about luck, being lucky, being unlucky. There are a lot of references that if I didn't have to use my phone now, I had all kinds of things circled and ready to go. But if you could maybe read a line or two that has to do with luck and unlucky and tell us why that's such an important theme.
I will, thank you. This is from chapter 2. Mom and Dad were lucky people for a time. That time a boy meets girl, first dates, long kisses, and paisley pants in the 60s. Not that the 60s were such a lucky time, but that Sandy Barnes and David Hodges met and fell in love. They were both healthy, attractive, and somewhat athletic. They met in 1967, the year David escaped Vietnam thanks to an erratic heartbeat discovered during his physical exam. A few months earlier, my mother dodged a bullet during a race riot at Texas Southern University when Houston police fired 3,000 rounds of shotgun and carbon fire into a men's dormitory. A rookie cop on the job for 14 days took the bullet. He was unlucky. I use this repetition of lucky and unlucky throughout the novel.
Yeah. Quite effectively.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, at this time, when I was writing it, it was the crisis in Syria and all the refugees leaving the Middle East and in these boats, if you could call it a boat, crossing the Aegean Sea, trying to go through Greece and later into Europe. And I talk about that as well, as far as lucky and unlucky, if I may read just a little bit.
Oh, please do, yes.
So this is Kim, our protagonist. She's an adult now. She's a librarian in downtown Houston. That most of the patrons are homeless because they live in Sam Houston Park during the day and visit the library. So Kim has taken her first vacation and she's gone to Copenhagen because her entire life, she loved the story of The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen. And there's a bronze statue of the Little Mermaid in Copenhagen. So she's visiting Copenhagen. She's back at the hotel. She's going to have a drink at the bar. Perched on an impossibly tall bar stool of chrome and leather, I ordered a cognac. A man in a British uniform and a woman sitting next to me were engaged in a heated discussion. I occasionally heard the words refugee and Syria. I tried not to listen. Looking at the cognac glass, I went back to the beautiful lunch I had in the city today. And then I heard, Putin has Europe terrified, especially the Poles. Add the refugee crisis on top of it, and Europe's imploding. The officer explained to the woman while looking over her shoulder and smiling at me. I didn't smile back. Why don't you join us, Yank? We're all here on business, trying to relax before the next meeting. We're just discussing the current refugee crisis in Copenhagen, the woman, also British, said. How do you know I'm American? Your clothes. But clearly, you must have an opinion about the European refugee crisis. Don't you think it's rather odd that Denmark, supposedly a world leader when it comes to human rights and development, has adopted such tough policies regarding the refugees? I didn't take the bait. She wasn't interested in my opinion, and she obviously thought my clothes were tasteless. She sighed heavily before launching into another argument. The Danish government placed ads in Arabic newspapers discouraging immigration. Then they passed a bill restricting family unification for Syrian refugees. Police were allowed to search and seize their assets. Just an example of as long as it's not in my backyard, I offered. Excuse me, the woman quipped. Her counterpart thought it was funny. Yes, yes, how right you are, he laughed, touching my back with his open palm. I stiffened, elevating my spine to the chrome of the bar stool. Well, yes, the Danes have had a time. They try to send the refugees back via airplane, but the poor devils defecate on themselves in our return. I'd crap in my pants too if I had to go back to Syria, I said, removing his hand from my back. This was met with another round of laughter by the man and the roll of the eyes from the woman. You can't break the Arabs. That's what Europe doesn't understand, he explained with his hands folded in front of him on the bar. They're like the Irish. During the bloody troubles, I was a young officer stationed in an outpost in County Armagh. I beat as many Irishmen as I could who were arrogant enough to be out after the curfew. Every time I hit a paddy, I thought of a fellow officer dying from an IRA sniper shot, ringing through the hills around Cross McGlen. You couldn't make those people talk. We tried with the children, candy and toys. They took it and ran. We threatened to drop them from helicopters. They still didn't talk. Like the Arabs, you couldn't break them. They were going to survive no matter how much the rest of us hated them. The bartender was standing in front of the British officer. You're ruining the vibe. Here's the tab, get out. How dare you? I'm a respectable employee of this hotel. Who do you think the manager will believe, a drunken soldier or me? The woman produced a credit card and paid the bill. She looked at her colleague and together they left the bar without saying another word. I finished my cognac in one long drink without looking at the bartender. I had joined the ranks of the ugly American abroad, guilty by association. I dreamed of the Little Mermaid that night. She was rescuing Syrian children in the Aegean Sea.
Wow, wow. Okay, there are a million things going through my head that I would love to follow up with in just that reading. First of all, though, I want two things. One, I think readers of fiction don't really often or always know how much research goes into Even something that you can read in 5 minutes could take you weeks and weeks to research. If you could address research in a second, but also I know that you like to travel. Have you been to Copenhagen, and was were you a part of any of that you put on the page?
Yes, yes. I have been to Copenhagen, and I was there in 2019, and I happened to be part of a conversation where there were diplomats from Poland, Denmark, America, France, and England. And sitting next to me during this conversation was a British officer.
Mm.
And he told me about being in Ireland. He was an older gentleman, maybe late 60s. He was in Ireland during the Troubles, during the IRA. And he told me a story about how they would beat the Irish on the streets after curfew.
Oh, wow.
Young
Wow.
boys.
Mhm.
And to give him credit, and he'll remain unnamed, he cried when he was telling me, as an
Oh, I can
older man,
imagine.
reflecting on who he was as a soldier and what that assignment was. So that is part of a true story. And when I was looking through the book today, finding reading passages, and I found that, I got chills thinking about Putin and where we are right now with Ukraine.
Mhm. Oh, God, I can imagine. Yes.
So yes, at that time, I did a lot of research, particularly about Denmark. It was named at one time one of the happiest places to live in the world because of their economy, their health system. They're very liberal, and how things can change within a culture when people begin thinking their way of life is changing because other people are entering, looking for a home, looking for acceptance. And in the book, I play on that theme a lot because Kim, the librarian, most of her patrons are the homeless. They're looking for a home. They are searching for acceptance. I talk a lot about animal shelters, and Kim adopts a dog from an animal shelter. Again, these animals in a shelter are searching for a home and acceptance, just like these refugees, just like the youngest sister in her physical and emotional disability, and decides, and this is where things change between the theme of luck and unlucky. She decides it's not about luck and unlucky, it's about choices made. And I have a choice to make about being happy and not vengeful or angry about what happened to me. There are things far worse in this world. She's somewhat like a saint, very pure in her love for others and how she does not see color or religion. She has a very good friend in the book when she's in high school that is Syrian, that has been Syrian American, that has been in this country for 2 generations, that later leaves to Syria to help his people. So
you look, the research and the work that you've put in is just amazing. But this little piece now that you've just gone over is a perfect segue for me to move into what I promised at the beginning of this, is the 2 parts, the book first and now the themes and the messages. So if we have about maybe 10 more minutes before we can take some questions. So how about addressing that? What are some of the key things? One that we've talked about before, and I'd like to hear you address this again, is what does this book tell us about what success means in our culture right now?
Well, in the book, I discuss perfection and elitism, that it becomes crippling to Kim. In the beginning, she's put in a bubble of people like herself, attractive, very bright, the bluebirds through middle school or junior high, what we called it in the 70s and 80s. And she moves with that group all the way to almost college, though she feels free from them and for a while, she still suffers from, it's almost like a stranglehold. And I think many people feel this. We know that from what we hear, what social media does to young girls.
Mm-hmm.
When they see beautiful women that have been airbrushed on magazine covers and the perfection of Hollywood actresses, that young girls feel like, I need to be thin, I need to be perfect. What is wrong with me that I'm not? That theme in our culture that is very taxing to young girls, young women, and even older women. You know, I touched briefly upon ageism and women. We have one of the most crippling cultures in the world, that women over 50 become invisible. And that's really something I addressed in my TEDx talk in Fearless Women. And I think elitism is crippling in our culture. I think clawing for perfection is crippling. And I use the purity of Kathy Renee as an example of, she does not have the perfection of beauty and being gifted academically, yet she is one of the happiest characters in the book. Why? She loves people. She's enjoying her life. And I think elitism and the need to follow that and perfection is crippling people and keeping them from finding the real joy about living. And that's loving oneself and loving others.
And of course, that is really important all the way through the book. We see some of these lessons. Is there one in particular area that you feel like really gives that impression on how important that is? Or would you say that it's a subtle message that you're sprinkling throughout the novel?
Yes, I tried to stay with that theme, from introducing the reader to the Bluebird group, the elite reading group, in the same classroom with the Blackbirds or the Crows, which are children with learning disabilities or or behavioral disabilities. It's a cruel thing, the naming, the labeling, and comparing those side by side. And it's something our public school system used as an experiment. What's the best way to learn?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a former public school teacher. And I found throughout my career, we were constantly being given a new approach to teaching. And that's just what public school teaching is. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
No, I was just going to say that, you know, you also talk about the notion of perfection. And while I was reading the book, I couldn't help but think, you know, this is interesting. what resonated with me, I got thinking about how whenever I'd get a new car, I wanted my husband to hurry up and put a door ding because there was too much pressure trying to keep it perfect. And once there was a little flaw, then you're free to just not worry about it anymore. And we see moments of like that, though, as you write them in the book. So I think before we let the viewers and listeners start asking questions, I would like to ask you this. When someone has finished the book, puts it down and walks away from having completed it, what do you want them to take with them? What is it that you want the lasting impression to be?
Well, as a writer, I will never tell you, reader, what to think, what to believe. I just want you to think, to open your mind, to open your heart. Of course. This book is my humble attempt to say, love yourself more, love others more. That's the real joy in life, because we don't know, just thinking how Putin was a threat to the Poles and all those people met, and the people from the Middle East with their babies in boats trying to reach a safer home. We don't know what will change from day to day in our lives, in our world. 2020 taught us that. Even fast forward to right now, what is going on in the world. So what are the things we control? And that's why Kathy Renee is so great in demonstrating luck is about choices made. We can choose to love ourselves, love the people around us. Try to be a light, as corny as it may sound, just enjoying a little bit more.
Right, yes. And you know, like Blake said here, you know, that is you know, it reminds me when my oldest daughter was probably in 3rd grade, she came home one day and said she had a hard day, that people weren't nice. And I said, well, you know, you could change that tomorrow. Every time you make eye contact with somebody, smile at them. So she did. The next day she came home and said it was the greatest day ever. Everybody was smiling at me, and you know, and all this. So you know, these are messages that resonate. Probably everybody here now listening to you speak can think of examples where that choice made a difference in their lives. So I just want to thank you for giving me the chance to ask you questions. I would love to, I guess, Blake, I think you said you were going to be monitoring chat, or if there's anybody that just wants to throw questions out there, why don't we pass it along, hand the gavel to somebody else and see what we have from the listeners.
Well, you know, we were talking, just listening to you talk about, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow in our lives and all this other stuff. And this book came out, you know, just prior to the pandemic. And we got a question about this kind of at the start, just about, you know, about having your book available before the COVID lockdown, maybe thinking that would help it get read. But then what challenges did you face over the last 2 years? With the book? This is a question from the chat.
Thank you for your question. Well, it was difficult because I'm traditionally published, so I'm always thinking about the publisher and the people that work for the publisher. They took a financial risk to print this book, and I think about the indie bookstores. And so I decided early on, I'm not going to feel sorry for me. I'm going to work and partner as much as I can with indie bookstores, and to be available, I'll do a virtual chat. I'll go stand in your parking lot and help pass out books.
And she will do it. She commits herself to something. Yeah. It's a done deal.
Well, I felt responsible. This was my job, and part of that responsibility was so that publisher didn't take a loss, and so that little bookstore didn't shut its doors. I mean, River Oaks bookstore in Houston did. And I had signings there with other books, and that broke my heart. That was a bookstore that had been in that neighborhood since the 70s. People loved it. It was heartbreaking. So what could I control in my world? Okay, what could I make effective, a positive change? I could do shout outs on social media about the book. Hey, this is where you could get it. I could say, hey, I'll do a Zoom chat with you, book club. I kept working it. And I was fortunate, people were receptive. The book sold well, and it continues to, because places like Gemini Inc., this format tonight is giving new breath to the book. So, choices made. I couldn't control the pandemic. There was nothing I could do about it. And I wasn't going to let it cripple me as an author and my responsibilities.
I'm wondering, with Hannah and Ariella coming out in August, things seem to be kind of opening up, but do you feel like you learned a lot about, marketing your book through this? Like, are you going to have a hybrid strategy going forward, or in years past? Because it seems like, just somebody who's noticing social media and your presence on social media and how good you are about promoting yourself and other people, are you going to kind of continue with the Zoom stuff? I mean, just for writers out there, maybe wondering what kind of strategies there are in a hybrid world.
It's a great question. I hope to do more in-person author events. As we were speaking before we came on board, it's great to be with people. Isn't it great to be with people? I'm looking at Kathleen Rogers, who's also a New Mexico girl, but lives in Dallas and is a traditionally published author. I miss seeing her in person. Marjorie, so I'm
another New Mexico girl.
Yes, I'm hopeful for more in-person events, but I will do. That's my responsibility as an author, to meet the reader where they happen to be. If you're more comfortable with Zoom, absolutely, I'm happy to show up. That's my job. So.
Well, speaking of those in-person events, we got another question. When did you say you were going to be at the Kerrville Library? Are you going to be at the Kerrville Library in Texas?
I will be September 24th. It's a Saturday, and it is a free event plus free lunch. And we are having Gemini Inc. come and give a session on the great things they do for authors. We have some other Texas authors there. I'm very proud of that library. The founder of HEB, we all love HEB in Texas, is originally from Kerrville. My father-in-law went to school with him. My father-in-law has passed for many years, but it's got a great family connection. And all you have to do is show up. We're going to have a Texas publisher there. TCU Press is going to be there, hopefully. So there will be pitch sessions for writers. Writers learn about Gemini Inc. We're going to have an author alley at the end of the day, meet the authors. Very excited and very grateful to the Kerrville Library for opening their doors to this.
That's awesome.
Wonderful.
Does anybody want to unmute themselves? Did you have any questions while during the past hour? Feel free to unmute yourself or put your question in the chat. Yes, Kathleen?
This isn't a question, but I'm so proud of Johnnie. And I want to say this, Johnnie is a friend to so many other authors, and she's always willing to lift other authors up and give a hand and encourage. She's an encourager.
Thank you.
That is very true. I second that. Yes.
Thank you. Hey, publishing is a very, very tough business. It's very, very tough. And writers, we tend to be introverts. We're kind of we're always processing that undertow of the human story, right? And we don't get our stories published until somebody takes a chance on us. So I recognize how hard that is. And I'm happy to lift others up as others have done for me. So, you know, audience, support authors, support those small presses, those university presses. They're trying to stay alive too. Grateful for the journey. It amazes me to this day. And I was chatting with Kathleen briefly before I came on board. I still get very nervous because it is my dream come true. This is what I wanted since I was a little girl. I became an English teacher because I thought, I got to earn a living, right? So couldn't do what I love to do without these organizations and without the readers buying the book and the publisher. So thank you for your kind support.
Well, thanks for being here tonight, Johnnie and Marjorie. Thanks for leading such a wonderful conversation. We are going to put this up on YouTube where others can enjoy it and find it. I want to thank just Gemini Inc. For helping us coordinate this. And it was a really wonderful conversation. Johnnie, Marjorie, thank you for being here tonight. And thank you, everybody. We'll see you again next month.
Okay.
Thank you for the privilege of interviewing Johnnie. I enjoyed it.
My honor. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Peace out.
so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you.